Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reacting to another Peter video with Destiny in it.
And therefore there are exceptions to the rule.
How so?
As per Trump's executive order, women need to be defended from gender ideology extremism. Move.
Oh, I think we have a 10. We have a 10.
God bless you, Mr. President.
Bro, I'm not gonna lie. Like, yeah, there's some older college girls, older women. I I don't know exactly what executive order this is, but having little girls stand there who know nothing about what is going on is cringe. It's so weird. People play this politics game to be so ungenuine. Well, politics is all about manipulating the populace and making them visualize as well as interpret things their way. So it's so cringe, though.
James and David, step forward.
Okay, well, I'll just start on something that was recent based on the EOs, was women's sports, for example. Let's just go off the physical threats. We had the woman that got a concussion from a volleyball being spiked into her head by a trans-identified player. It literally had her hospitalized. We had another that had a skull fracture after being tackled in an MMA fight.
I'll put it like this. I don't agree with trans women being in women's sports, especially professionals. Basically, high school and above, I'm like, nope, no need to put them together. It's just doing way too much. There's too much of a gap that needs to be closed due to medication. You're just doing too much there. So I am vehemently against it. I've always been against it. So that's kind of where my stance is.
Also by a trans-identified male. So just based off of those examples, but in the sports example actually goes deeper than just the physical threat. There is also opportunity being removed from girls. What I've noticed, unfortunately, is that a lot of people that really are a part of the gender ideology don't really take sports seriously. It's not their vibe. It's not who they are, so they don't see it as something that's important. Yet sports is an avenue for girls to get into college, get amazing jobs, make all these networking and connections. It's more than just an after-school activity. So
Okay, let's.
All right, so first I'd like to address the claim that it's, I guess, more dangerous for women if trans women are competing in women's sports. There's been a lot of studies that have been done that have said that the, let's say, male advantage is basically eliminated after multiple years of hormone therapy, which I wouldn't be against mandating that as a rule to be able to participate as a trans person in women's sports. I'd also like to say that in those sports that you mentioned, volleyball and MMA, a risk of concussion or fractures, that's part of the sport. I mean, a cis woman could have also.
Although I agree with what she, I have no idea, is about to say in terms of it can't happen with a cis woman. At the end of the day, what can happen should be limited based off the circumstances that is taking place in the activity that is going on. So I hear you, but I just don't think it is a strong argument. Now, the stuff about if you're on hormone treatment for a long enough time, again, I hear you, but again, in order for you to be a professional, you would have to be starting at a very, very young age, which I also think is very problematic. So I just think there's too many factors that I think is problematic that can make it okay. I think it's fine. I mean, there's a lot of sports where it's mixed gender, right? There's intramurals in college and stuff like that. But when it comes to professionals, I mean, unless there's going to be a trans professional league, which I'll be honest, nobody's really gonna watch. I'm sorry. There's not a good enough argument here.
Also done that to a cis woman. It's not impossible to happen just because it's a trans woman.
Sure. But I'm not saying it's impossible if it's going to happen with two cis women competing against each other. The chances increase if the person you're competing against has a larger wingspan, which hormones will do nothing for, broader shoulders, larger lung capacity.
So let's say, what if that trans woman that was competing, what if she had gotten HRT or medically transitioned before she had hit male puberty? Would that be acceptable?
Well, that's kind of a double-edged sword because I don't believe in intervention prior to puberty on that end. But let's say if that already happened, which is the case for a lot of people,
No, it's not. Stop lying. It's not the case for a lot of people. You try to throw that in there because MAGA is so slick. No, it's not the case for multiple people. But I agree that I don't agree. I already said it. I don't agree with medical transitioning before puberty.
no, because I think it depends. It's a case-by-case basis because some men are 6 feet tall, some men are 5'2". So if they
I already said my piece. I don't really need to listen to this conversation moving forward. There's really, unless they can give me something,
Transition.
that'll change my
in
mind.
this case, if they had
Let me hear
taken,
you out.
puberty blockers and then HRT before the age of 18, they had not hit any stage of male puberty. That means they'd gone through an entirely female puberty, no male puberty at all. So they would have, outside of their primary.
Okay, I'm just not gonna agree. So let me just move forward.
Director, I believe, was interviewed by Congress. He said there was 12 trans people competing
Oh, okay,
in
and
the
this might
NCAA.
be a good point. Hold on.
Director, I believe, was
My question would be, why not just have a different league so that it's not complete, so it's not infringing on female sports? You know what I mean?
So when the NCAA director, I believe, was interviewed by Congress, he said there was 12 trans people competing in the NCAA, or it was less than 20, definitely. So what other league could we make for just these couple dozen even women?
Sure, let's take that at face value, but with the trends and projections going the way they are, it clearly won't stay that way. You know, every generation has more trans-identified and LGBT-identified people in it, like almost double every generation.
That's not a good argument. I think it's just one of those things where it's like, I hear you. This is the way you want to live, but there's pros and cons in terms of a lifestyle. And this particular lifestyle, the con is you can't play in professional sports. It's as simple as that. I can't feel sorry for you because there's just too many factors that play into this conversation. I think it's fine for you to live the way you want. I feel like you shouldn't be discriminated to live the way you want. I feel like a lot of things that MAG is doing right now is unhinged in terms of how they're demonizing trans people. However, at the end of the day, this is your lifestyle, and one thing you cannot do is play professional sports. I'm sorry.
So clearly it's going to come to a head. So I think getting ahead of it and creating its own separate space would be better and safer. And I think one title being taken away from a female that deserved that title or deserved that medal is too much. And I think the UN, adult human female.
Okay, define female.
She has the female for that person, and they work their whole life, and then it gets taken away. So.
Okay, so in the interest of time, let's move on from sports to general trans issues.
Bathrooms, yeah.
So, what is a woman?
Adult human female.
Okay, define female.
What is a woman? A woman is an adult female, but there's the biological factors that play into what a woman is, as well as known cultural, societal norms that determine a woman as well. So it's a combination of factors, but at the end of the day, those factors derive from something that is considered baseline woman traits based off being biologically female.
She has the female, she produces eggs.
Okay, so just that. Nothing to do, no chromosomes. You don't take that into account?
Well, you take that into account, but I know that chromosomes can come in a spectrum, and the thing is that I don't think the intersex argument is valid at all because that's a genetic abnormality. That does not mean that sex is on a spectrum, and usually every person who is intersex, which is also kind of a what's it called? It's not a good term. It's a little confusing. They usually lean one way or the other, and instead what kids are being taught now is that people are born on some kind of spectrum completely, and you can be anything, when really we're talking about genetic abnormalities, has nothing to do with the sex spectrum.
As per Trump's executive order, it is biological truth that there are only two sexes, male and female. Move.
As of today, It will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
Okay, so you come to the neutral, please, Stephen. You get to ask questions for 5 minutes.
There's only two genders or two sexes. Two sexes? Yes, obviously there's two sexes. Two genders. It becomes more of a conversation, I guess. Like gender is purely based off like societal and cultural norms that are placed upon based off preconceived notions of what a man or a woman does in society, right? So there can be a lot of fluidity there. Like, I mean, there's men that love fashion and that loves to be a bit feminine, but still rails a woman. There's women who are like tomboyish, who are every guy's favorite dream. Like, there's definitely kind of a spectrum with gender. Even in like different cultures, there's kind of a spectrum with gender. But ultimately, how much doesn't I don't care. Like, I'll be honest, I don't care. I don't care if you're in different spectrums in gender. All I know is that there's two sexes. Now, when it comes to filling out like some medical document, I think it's just easier to go men and woman, because the only reason why the identification, from my understanding, of man and woman is necessary is so they make sure they give you the proper care, and you get the certain whatever like benefits or governmental fit certain standards as well. So that is for very logistical reasons why they need to identify you as man or female. So honestly, I could care less that you want to identify yourself in like 20 different ways because it hurts your feelings. I don't care. So ultimately, if you want to be addressed a certain way, fine. I'm not here to disrespect people just to disrespect people. That's kind of weird. I don't really care about if you want to identify on the gender spectrum. But in terms of filling out a document, I don't care if there's only two genders on the document. I'm gonna be honest. I don't care at all.
I guess I'm kind of neutral on it because I feel like all categories at the end of the day have some form of like construction of them. Are you claiming, do you think there are more than two categories of sexes, or?
Yeah, I think that the existence of intersex people, as we had gotten into a little bit before, fundamentally means that there's between male and female in terms of sex.
What is intersex to you? Your definition of that, I guess?
So there's multiple definitions of intersex, but usually that would mean when someone's primary sex characteristics like genitalia are mixed, or it doesn't match their inner genitalia, or I would also like to put forward that it's not usually included in intersex, but trans people often have the way their brains are set up. You can see it in MRIs and MCATs and scans. Their brain matter is more likely, in structure, is more likely to correspond to that of the sex that they identify as rather than the sex that they were born as.
Okay. Would trans men or trans women be a third or fourth sex to you then, or?
I don't generally agree with the idea of sex in the first place because I think there's so many abnormalities that it should just exist on a spectrum.
Okay. What am I asking this guy? Fuck. Do you think that I feel like I already know all of his. I don't even know what I would ask.
All right, let me do this too. We're going to swap out David and in Brett. Okay.
Okay. Brett I will fight with here. What does biological truth mean to you?
I don't think there's such a concept. There's biological knowledge. I can tell you about what the differences between sexually reproducing organisms happen to be. And in order for a sexually reproducing organism to sexually reproduce, you would need the binary sexual male and female dichotomy. And the existence of these problematic cases, these edge cases, do not refute the existence of the binary male and female.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with that. I don't think that even if there were true hermaphroditic cases or hermaphroditic cases where both gametes are existing in the same species, which I think is incredibly rare, but I think it has happened a few times in humans, even that doesn't necessarily refute the binary. I guess just from an ontological sense, saying like biological truth, I feel like gives way more philosophical weight to a scientist than they ever should have, right? To be able to define like, well, what is a true feature? Like, do trees exist separate from leaves, separate from the ground? Can any collection of matter be defined as a thing? This is a very boring like epistemic metaphysics question, but yeah, that's the only thing I would be uncomfortable saying that like this is a biological truth. And it's like, I mean, insofar as this is our system of biology, I guess, yeah.
So would I. I would just say this is our best explanation of how it is that organisms happen to reproduce as the male and female. Now, we are biological.
I hear what Destiny's saying, because there is so much that goes into it, and there's so much variation. And then you have to nail down certain principles that apply universally to so many other different biological organisms. And then it starts getting very tricky, which is like, I hear you, but the structural idea that I do think this guy's going to talk about is that the binary is needed in order to proliferate or propagate. No, propagate, proliferate. I feel like there's a better term. Basically, the idea to continue the human species and continue reproduction, right? So I agree, basically.
biological entities, but that is not the most important part about us. The most important part about us is not whether or not we have a male or female brain or male or female genitalia, but the mind that we have. And the mind is an asexual thing. In principle, in some distant future, this mind that runs on our brain could be downloaded onto a computer somewhere, and the computer would have no gender. And in fact, AGI would have no gender. So therefore,
That's a very interesting concept. The mind is asexual. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think I agree with that. Let me think. The mind is asexual. No, I don't agree with that. Because ultimately, unless the mind has no external factors that play, even without external stimuli or cultural influence or environmental factors that determine someone's behavior, I still think there might be an inherent biological function that has the necessity to reproduce. I feel like that is inherent, so I don't think I agree there.
minds have no gender. They do not have a sex. You're infinitely elastic to choose your gender expression because of the way in which our mind works. Granted, that brains may very well be able to be distinguished as male or female once you put in an MRI, but we are not brains, we're minds.
I feel like you get into really weird, I guess it depends on how you're viewing the mind-brain distinction there, because then my next question, I would just go organ through organ. Maybe I could very easily ask, is a penis a male or a female thing? And maybe we could gender that as male. But if I were to say, is there such thing as a female or a male arm, or a heart, or any other part of the body? I feel like...
I suppose you could possibly identify, in the same way, a similar way that you identify a brain as being either male or female by looking at the MRI, you could say, the heart actually belongs to a male, because
So he's distinguishing mind and brain, and I get what he's trying to do. I just don't think that distinction is meaningful enough to determine the separation that he's referring to. So I'm not on board, but I do think it's an interesting conversation.
if you drill down into the cells, you'd see that there are XY chromosomes there, indicating a male, or just YY chromosomes inside of it. Yeah, this idea that the brain and the mind are different is basically a law of physics. That's computational universality, that the brain is the hardware and the mind is the software running on the brain.
Can I push back on that?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so the thing is that the way the brain is set up chemically and the way it is structured, that affects how the mind works, right?
In fact, no. It's a common misconception. You do have different sensations and feelings depending upon the kinds of hormones that you have, but that will not determine your thoughts or behaviours. You will always have a choice. I might very well wake up with, a whole lot of testosterone running through me and feel more aggressive, but that doesn't mean I will be aggressive.
Well,
I choose.
Wait a second. I got a big question about that. Wait, you think that you can make choices independent of the physical reality of the mind?
I think that's
legit what I was thinking as well, but I'm gonna let them talk it. I'm gonna let them talk it out.
sort of
I think what he's getting at, and what I would agree with, and I don't know if you're religious or not, so that might influence this as well. So I would view the mind is completely an abstraction of the underlying stuff in the brain. So if you change the underlying stuff in the brain, the mind necessarily will change as well. But you disagree with that, or?
No, that's fine. But of course, we are minds, and so we have ideas, we generate ideas, but I like to say we're not identical to any of our ideas, and we can choose amongst them. I endorse free will.
I
think we can
appreciate
create
these
new explanations,
conversations.
bring new
Where does
options
that
into it.
free will?
But these conversations, you notice that you ain't gonna have this type of conversation with two MAGA people. No, they're gonna speak some narratives, man. Oh man, interesting.
How ultimately would you choose if not by relying on some brain state? Where is the choice coming from, I guess?
The choice, it's the wrong level of analysis. So if we start to talk about the brain, then immediately we're in the realm of neuroscience rather than the realm of something like psychology or philosophy, and the correct level of analysis would be the mental state, the mind.
He wanted to push back.
Yeah, so if, say, someone had a psychotic disorder, knowing that they had a psychotic disorder and saying, well, I don't want to have that anymore, would that change the fact that they have a psychotic disorder? No. I mean, the way that their brain is set up, the way that there are chemical imbalances in their brain, they would need to be medicated for that to actually be changed. They can't just think, I'm going to get better. So, yes, the way I agree with Destiny on this, the mind is separate from the brain, but the way the mind works and what it is because of how the brain is. It can't be detached.
No, I agree. It's a similar argument too, the way in which a flight simulator works depends to some extent, or depends to a large extent, upon what's going on with the hardware. Yes, of course. And so when you say, well, if you take some sort of antipsychotic in order to not be psychotic anymore, yeah, that is a choice that you would yourself make. And so you can't get outside of this realm of choice, even if you're choosing to take a medication which is going to help you make different choices in the future, namely not psychotic ones.
I guess the big issue, though, is what is that? The initial choice, all of these things are predetermined by the physical state of the brain, no?
Oh, physical state of the universe, yeah. I don't think that there is a contradiction between physical determinism and free will. I'm a compatibilist of a kind.
Okay, so let's talk functionally.
Interesting.
So
Very
you can say
interesting.
yes, self-identification doesn't matter in terms of trans issues, but if a person has medically transitioned, if even it can get complicated, but if you were looking at a person and you thought, okay, well, that's a woman, but you didn't know they were a trans person, you didn't know they were a trans woman, let's say, don't you think that they have transitioned in some way to being a woman? Like
I think that, yeah,
femaleness.
I would grant, for example, I was having this discussion the other day, that this person who presents as a woman and looks for all the world like a woman should be granted all the rights and privileges of being a woman, for example. I would use their pronouns or whatever it happens to be. However, that wouldn't change the scientific fact that they still have XY chromosomes and are technically biologically a male.
But why does that matter? In terms
It doesn't matter except if you're interested in something like scientific truth or good explanations in science. So it's the same as you can dress up your cat like a dog all you like, but it's still going to be a cat at the end of the day.
So in terms of
I like this guy. I like this. There's a lot of stuff I agree with there. I mean, I don't want to just repeat what he said because there are some things that I definitely co-sign there. Maybe this person's going to ask the question, then yes, the reality is the reality, but the reality in regards to a conversation in terms of determining their existence and determining the reaction or the interaction with this type of existence, someone dressing up a cat or dog could be ha ha funny, but something regarding a trans person is held with visceral and even policy is made against it. Someone's not going to make policy against someone dressing a cat as a dog or whatever. So maybe that's what this person's about to ask. I don't know, but I'd be curious to see what he responds to that.
scientific truth, do you think that trans people don't know that they were born as the sex that they were? Do you think they're just fundamentally disputing that?
No, of course not. Like, as I say, a trans person, people are either male or female except for these small edge cases. That's the biological reality.
Okay.
Now, how they choose to express themselves in terms of their gender, that is a feature of the mind, which, as I say, may as well be regarded as asexual. There's no male or female mind, even if there are male and female brains.
Okay, so even if they're, I'd actually like to talk to you about that in terms of the brain, in terms of the brain structure. So there was a study done that found that the brains of trans women, almost 100% of the time, were identified as the same as a cis woman's brain, and the brains of trans men, almost 100% of the time, were identified as the same as a cis man's brain. This was sometimes before the age of 12. It was so accurate that they could predict later gender dysphoria or transgender identity. And it was also found that even if a person had had no access to HRT or if they hadn't medically
I'll be very curious on this study. I'll be very curious to look at this study. I don't think it would really change my mind in terms of the stances that I said earlier on in the video, but I'll be curious to look at this study in particular.
transition, their brain was still the same. Like if they were a trans man that didn't transition, their brain would still be identified as like a male brain. Don't you think that that has any effect then on whether or not like that they have of them being biologically male? It's a biological feature.
I'm not sure what the point there is. So yes, I can grant you that there are some people who might present in a female way that have a male brain or something like that. You can do these brain scans and use the brain scan in order to determine what the sex of that particular brain is or the sex of that particular person is. But again, I'm granting the fact that regardless of what your brain is, absolutely regardless of what your brain is, all brains are capable of basically doing the same thing, of having an experience of learning physics, having an experience of being an artist, having an experience of being feminine to some extent, masculine to some extent, or in fact entirely masculine and entirely feminine, regardless of what your brain happens to be.
Okay, so if you agree that you would respect a trans woman's like pronouns, whatever, if you agree that that being intersex is an edge case, then why do you strongly agree that women need to be defended from gender ideology?
Oh, well, that's a separate issue altogether.
Oh,
We moved on from that.
biological. Oh, yeah, biological. Sorry.
Yeah. So again, there's a difference between the scientific fact of the matter of there being two sexes, no matter what the animal happens to be. Kangaroos are either male or female. Even if there are intersex kangaroos, it doesn't change
Kangaroos,
the
he's from
fact.
Australia. Kangaroos, like not like, you know, goats or anything.
To pose a question, person has XXY chromosomes, mixed genitalia,
Yes.
male or female.
It entirely depends upon whether or not they're able to have offspring, and if they
They
produce
can have,
sperm.
they produce neither sperm nor eggs.
Again, I can grant you the existence of the edge case middle ground intersex, but that does not refute the idea that animals, sexually reproducing animals, are male or female.
Doesn't any existence of an exception to the rule mean that the rule doesn't exist?
Of course, that's a very good philosophical problem. Exceptions to rules prove there must be a rule. The rule exists, and therefore there are exceptions to the rule.
How so? If there's something that doesn't fit the rule, if you say there's only zeros and ones and there's a 2, then, well, I mean, zeros and ones are still the only thing that exists except for this 2, but we'll just put that away. We don't need to think about that. Any exception to the rule means it's not a rule.
No, that's not the way that the rules work. You could have, for example, there exists.
Any exception to the rule means that there's not a rule. I completely disagree with that. I completely disagree with that. Just because there's an exception to the rule does not mean that the rule doesn't exist. It could mean that the rule is not 100% full and wide encompassing, but exceptions are could either change a rule or they could highlight a flaw in the rule, but that doesn't mean that the rule is completely gone. I think he's about to name an example. I'll see if I agree with that example, or I can name my own example.
Exist in the world tigers and lions, and they're two distinct things. However, a tiger can mate with a lion, and you can get tigons and ligers. Those things exist, but that does not refute the existence of tigers and lions. And in the same way, you can have males and females, and that's a biological rule. There exist these things called males and females, which are required for our species to reproduce. And if they didn't exist, if there were no such thing as these two different sexes, you wouldn't have a continuation of the species. So the mere fact that there are some
Another example would be like something like someone getting an extra limb as a birth defect, right? In that situation, the rule is very clear that natural birth, you have 2 legs, 2 arms, all the normal genitalia, but you can't differentiate the rule, say, oh yeah, you can, for the most part, you can end up with anything. No, that is not the rule. There's an exception based off anomalies, and you can usually trace the anomalies to a factor that played into why they ended up the way they ended up. So, yeah.
people who can't reproduce, who have different sets of chromosomes, or who don't produce sperm and egg, or produce both, or whatever, doesn't change the fact that you have male and female as a biological reality. But that says nothing to do with the mind and whether or not people mentally can identify, if they're in a male body, as a female or vice versa.
Okay, so you agree that there's males and females. But once again, if a person, that edge case, if you say there's only 2, then where do they fit? Where do they fit into the 2?
They don't fit into the 2, but it doesn't deny the fact that there are 2 boxes. And you've got these two categories.
Do the other people just float around the boxes?
I mean, the question is, like, definitionally, wouldn't there need to be a 3rd box then?
Yeah.
For intersex?
You can have a 3rd box if you like, but
Well, that means there's not just 2. That means there's not just 2 sexes.
what's our claim again?
If there are only two sexes, male and female.
It is biological truth
Okay,
that
so
there are
then-
only 2 sexes, male and female.
But if you want to really push me on that, I would say, well, that's a non-sex. It's not a sex because those people in general, I suppose, cannot reproduce. It would be like a mule or something.
I would say, I guess, like, the reason why I'm neutral on this and why I don't enjoy this conversation is because I feel like there isn't very much pursuit of any type of ontological truth about the category of male or female. I think that this conversation is 100% held hostage by people that want to go on and make social arguments about it. So who should be allowed to participate in sports, who should be allowed to whatever. And because those arguments are best if you can source them from some sort of scientific foundation, people are like, oh, well, I want to argue with the science now about this.
So I was going to ask, isn't the way that people answer that question more ideological than scientific?
Yeah, but people try to, people do the same thing with history. If you look at Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, people like to argue, well, historically, this happened, and then it gives them justification for their current actions. But if you go to Russia and Ukraine, they'll give you 2 different histories. If you go to Israel, Palestine, they'll give you 2 different histories. If you talk to pro-trans and anti-trans people, they'll give you 2 different scientific definitions, because people would rather, if you can source your things scientifically, you don't even have to argue the social part. But the reality is I just don't think they should be connected. Like, we could imagine a world where 1% of women have spikes that come out of their wrists. We wouldn't let these women participate in any combat sport because they'd be killing people. It doesn't matter if they're women or not, we just wouldn't. They'd have an unfair advantage. Much the same, we could acknowledge that, we could say, okay, well, trans women are real, but because of the bodies they've been born into and the advantages granted thereof, we probably just wouldn't let them compete in sports with non-trans people. The same way that if you're a 5th grader who's been held back 15 years, you're not going to be on the same sports team as my son playing soccer. That's just not going to happen, right? So, I mean, I don't like the arguments that are rooted in history and scientific fact to establish these truths, because people are doing that because they don't want to have the more difficult sociological or the social argument, I think.
It depends on where you're
I'll
starting.
give you the last word.
I was just saying, immediately when I see the prompt, I'm automatically put in a scientific mindset. So I think to myself, well, if what we're talking about is just trying to explain how it is that we human beings exist, well, we human beings exist because males mate with females, and that's how reproduction works. And so, again, if you want to have the 3rd category and say there exists this 3rd category as a scientific fact, well, fair enough, but it doesn't.
But even that 3rd category has like a primary genitalia that can, for the most part, either that or they are not allowed to give birth. So again, they would kind of exist outside the function. Um, it's like if someone was born without any genitalia at all somehow. I mean, they will exist outside the function because the purpose of the two sexes is very deliberate, as he said, to reproduce.
Deny the explanation. There is a scientific explanation which involves these two sexes.
That was a good one. That was way better than some of the other ones because MAGA wasn't involved. Haha, Zinger. With that said, hope you guys enjoyed it. Like and subscribe. You have a good one. Take care and peace.